Hello, it's Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap analyst. Welcome back to the show. You can find me on YouTube, Twitter, Blue Sky, all under my name, Yossi Goslin. All the audio forms also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to subscribe to Third Apron. I've got a lot of more cap-centric articles on each team and their upcoming offseason. So all the teams that I've already covered on the podcast, I go into further detail there. And make sure to check out capsheets.com for all sorts of updates to the teams cap sheets as moves happen. I'm sure after today's lottery, we'll have a couple updates there. Just a couple things before we introduce my guests and everything. So I know that I've had some echo issues in the past and I've tried modifying it, and I finally discovered this little invention. As long as I listen to my guests through that, my mic doesn't pick up anything. So I believe I finally fixed the echo. I know it was like 90% fixed, but for everyone who's listened so far to the first 15 of these, thanks for bearing with me as I navigate all these technical issues. As I've discussed in previous episodes, I am going to be an instructor for Sports Business Classroom this summer, networking and educational event in Las Vegas during Summer League. There are still spots available. You could check the link in the description to register if you're interested in taking the chance on breaking into the industry and just, learn what that's like, meet a lot of people there. I'll be instructing for the salary cap program, and I've got a sign-up code. If you sign up with code Third Apron, you will get a lifetime subscription to the Third Apron newsletter. So today, this is number 16 out of 30 that we're going to talk about the Memphis Grizzlies, and joining me today to discuss, he's the Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal, and you can hear him talk about the Grizzlies daily on Locked On Grizzlies, Damichael Cole. Damichael, how are you? And in general, how was it covering the Grizzlies this year compared to some of the previous ones?
Y'all see what's going on, man. I'm doing well, but the Grizzlies this year is some of the previous ones. Well, when you talk about the previous season, you kind of got to break those up too, because I've been covering the team now for 4 seasons, which is wild to think. But the first 2 seasons, they were one of the hottest young teams in the NBA, right? 2021, 2022, 56 win team. And then they follow that up 51 win team, 2022, 2023, get to the second round of the playoffs, play Golden State in the 56 win season. And then you're on the up and up, right? And then the next year, Steven Adams gets hurt. You're still the number 2 seed, but they kind of fall, a step back, so to speak, losing the first round to what turned out to be a pretty good Los Angeles Lakers team. And then the injuries happened, a year ago. They battled a lot of injuries, didn't make the playoffs, were one of the worst teams in the league, ended up playing 34 or so players, like setting a bunch of league records because of all the injuries that they had. And this year was kind of the rebound year, or kind of just trying to get back to where things were previously. So how this season compared to the previous years, I'll say it was different because when this season concluded, this is the first time in my tenure covering the Grizzlies that we went from, kind of the conversation being like, oh, if they're on the up and up, right? They're a young team that's on the rise. Now it's like, I think it's generally accepted that they took a step back. And because of how the season ended, whether it was the series sweep to OKC, whether it was March, the way they played, and Taylor Jenkins being fired, and all these different things, they went from the first half of the season being the number 2 seed in the Western Conference, feeling like, hey, we play OKC, we got a decent shot, and to now, they're layers, it feels like, behind OKC and some other teams in the West.
Yeah, the perception of the Grizzlies feels a lot different now than it did in recent years,
Yeah, yeah.
where that whole honeymoon period between 2019 to 2022, and I suppose for some of the 23 season, yeah, they were this up and coming team and they overachieved so early on, and things were just always looking up. Since 2023, that sort of changed, and they try to do stuff to take the next step. Obviously, they had a gap year last year, didn't, so they couldn't really make any much progression last year, but just another season kind of on par with what was 22-23, a high regular season win team. And but then they just don't get out of the first round. Only one playoff victory in their past 6 years. So yeah, that they've done a great job just developing this core, pacing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't done anything super drastic that could hurt the core. And now it's starting. You could start to feel a lot of the perception has changed. A lot of people really asking now, well, how good is a core featuring John Moran, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Desmond Bane really? So now we know they're this group. They're pretty established. We know who they are for the most part. They're going to get you a lot of regular season games. The front office just does an amazing job time and time again, finding young players out of nowhere to fill out the bench, make it very deep to sustain this regular season success that they've always had. But it does feel like there needs to be some modification, and they've been trying to do it. They try to get Marcus Smart. They brought Marcus Smart to replace Dylan Brooks. Didn't work out. They went after Dorian Finney-Smith. So as you look at that top five, yeah, it definitely does feel like they got to do something, because they're going to run it back for the most part, roster-wise, as far as their core is concerned, and organizationally, they're not going to. I would be very surprised if they trade any of their top three guys, but I do think they need to supplement that group. So I'm just most curious. I don't think they're going to do anything super drastic. I don't think they're going to make any huge trade, anything like that. But I'm just curious if they are going to continue to get another two-way wing, because that's been the struggle the past few years, finding that additional wing guy that can complete their lineup, and who that might even could be.
Yeah, I think they'll definitely pursue that type of player and possibly even a couple, of those type players. I think you put it well when you said supplementing the roster around those three guys. Look, I'll put it like this. Desmond Bane, John Morant, Jaren Jackson Jr., there's still a lot of belief in that group. I think it's fair to say not as much as there previously was. It's like, this is the core that we feel like will definitely put us into championship contention. Now you're getting to a time period where you need to know if this is the core that can do that or not, because starting with next season, you're talking about Jaren Jackson Jr.'s new contract, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later, coming into the fold, in addition to the contracts that John Moran and Desmond Bane have already signed, which is likely going to put you in a position where you're going to enter the luxury tax, and depending on what else happens around that roster, you're probably going to dip into the first apron. So the urgency here is only increasing as those dollars go up and up and up. So with that being said, I think you pretty much got two more cracks at this thing before you really, like, the change that you said would be surprising this year, right? Moving one of the core three guys. I think this summer and next summer are kind of like your real look in the mirrors to that situation. And this summer is more of a lighter one, right? So the way I would put it is, you're saying, hey, okay, maybe we're not as confident in the big three as we once were, but what if that's because we've kind of just surrounded them with, not a great, group overall. Like, you've put different types of players around them, but there isn't a lot of versatility, and things like that. So I'm looking at what you just said. How can they go get some defensive wings in particular to help out the young guys like Jalen Wells, Vince Williams Jr., etc. And a couple names come to mind. You talk about free agency coming up. One name that I've kind of been beating the drum on consistently is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. The Grizzlies have their non-tax payer MLE, which is going to be a little bit over $14 million. And, that's something that I think roughly a little bit more than a third of a league will have access to. So that puts you in a position to where you can offer him more money than a lot of teams, because, as you know, a lot of teams just don't have the cap space is dried up around the league for the most part. So things like the non-taxpayer MLE really put you in a prime position to make a a nice move that can kind of move the needle for your team. And I'm looking at that as a way the Grizzlies could get involved with a guy like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You look at the Minnesota Timberwolves situation. Yeah, sure, they value him. I don't think this is a case of they just want to kick him off to the side. They value him. But the thing about the Minnesota Timberwolves is we just saw them before this season do some cost-cutting measures, and they already drafted. Right, they drafted Rob Dillingham. They drafted Terrence Shannon. So they internally they have the young guy too, the Clark kid. Like they have some pieces in place where if they have to part with Alexander Walker, they just basically promote some younger guys. So that makes sense for the Grizzlies. That's a guy who can play, that 3-and-D role, right? He shoots the three-pointer well, which is something the Grizzlies definitely need, in addition to someone who's going to play solid defense. They had solid defense with Marcus Smart. They had solid defense with Dylan Brooks. Neither of those guys gave them much three-point shooting. So that's what you want more of. And then it's good to have, multiple options. I think what makes Nickeil Alexander-Walker a good option for me is he can play a little bit, on the ball. He can play off the ball. He can play in lineups with Desmond Bane. He can play in lineups with John Morant. And, I think that's the prime target. But I think those are the type of players that we're looking at. You talk about just how do they supplement the roster around the big three. You're looking for your Malik Beasley. You're looking for your Chris Dunn. Of course, with that MLE, you better strike gold, right? But when you talk about marginal gains, Malik Beasley was a good marginal find for Detroit, right? Turned into a 6-man of the year candidate. A guy like Chris Dunn, who was basically fighting to stay in the league, turned into one of the best defenders, in the league. I mean, he's been one of the best defenders, but I mean, on a larger scale. But what he did with the Clippers, he played a really big role in that on that team. So those are the type of moves that you got to make, right? You're looking for those guys who can best supplement what you have in the big three, because you're going to have Zach Edey. You're going to have Jalen Wells. And then I think, Scottie Pippen Jr. really put himself on another level with the way that he played in the playoffs. But outside of that, you can make an argument that there's going to be a lot of movement on this roster. And I'm looking for toughness, right? I'm looking for guys who can be tone setters and just guys that can, from a basketball stylistically standpoint, complement Desmond Bane, John Morant, and Jaren Jackson Jr.
First, Michael, I appreciate you explaining the salary cap situation, what they have to, who they can realistically get. Makes my job easier. Anytime my guests can explain those dynamics, I'll take it. So a couple things to unpack there. First of all, you answered one of the questions I was going to ask you at the very end, which is, well, how much longer can the Grizzlies continue, going like this before some drastic changes could happen? You said you think this summer and next summer are going to be like the last two chances. So that's interesting to know. I was kind of wondering, because there definitely feels like there is going to be some type of, there's got to be somewhat of a clock on them. And I was just curious to know like how long that is. And I think that's reasonable.
Yeah.
So that's just something good to know as far as like, how much longer can we expect before they really have to show some results?
For sure. Yeah, I think the best way to put it is that, this summer is kind of the real big eye opener, right? Like, okay, can we do it or not? And we're gonna do everything around those guys to put ourselves in position to be able to do it. And then if that doesn't work out, the next summer it's like, all right, we got to make a big move here. So I think that's the way of kind of looking at it.
Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, 2023 they kind of tried to make that big move with Marcus Smart. I think they miscalculated on the type of player they needed. Obviously has fallen off since. But then last year, as far as 23, 24, sometimes these years where, okay, like John Morant didn't barely play, they had all these injuries. In a way, it was kind of a good step back for the Grizzlies because they end up getting this lottery pick. They bring in Zach Edey, and they have all this flexibility. They could really reset the back end of the roster. They find all these young guys to fill up the bench. So they're in a way that it was kind of like a good step back, like one step back, couple steps forward for them to be even more positioned, for them to be as competitive as they were this year, and to just set the table for more moves later. So let's go over some of those guys. So we know in the past they've been linked to guys like Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, and those would have been fantastic additions. Didn't happen. Both those guys are on the Knicks now. So I just kind of want to start at like the higher ends and then kind of get to some of the guys you mentioned because, yeah, in the end, those are probably the more realistic targets. But with, there's no guys that these like sub all-star, but still like really great wing starters. It's hard to see who like that is available, if they'll even become available.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's Kevin Durant. I just don't see the Grizzlies going in that direction. I would be surprised. They've been linked. I've seen the rumors. I just don't really buy them. The Celtics are obviously going to do something to reduce their tax bill. That's been a very big story. I don't think it'll be Jaylen Brown, even though I think that he can also be a very fantastic fit for the Grizzlies for the higher end of options. So now you start to go down a little bit. They've been linked to like Cam Johnson.
Yeah.
Could the Nuggets, maybe they got to do something. There's Michael Porter Jr. Again, like good players, not exactly maybe bringing the level of toughness and defense that you've mentioned. So then now you start to get closer to what you meant, the guys you're talking about, like Nickeil Alexander-Walker. He is very much like when I go to have my other guests on, they all point at the Wolves players, him, Naz Reid. Everyone wants what the Wolves have. And knowing their tax situation, maybe there could be an avenue to steal a guy there because it's going to be still a challenge for them to re-sign everyone, run back the entire team next year. One guy that as I look through teams, and I feel like this could be like a very nice ideal target for the Grizzlies. I would love if they can get a guy like Herb Jones, because I'm curious now that the Pelicans have changed their front office. Who knows what they feel about anyone on their roster. Herb mostly been a negative offensively in his career, but just an elite on-ball defender. I think fits the archetype of what they've been going for when they had Dillon Brooks and then tried to replace him with Marcus Smart and then wanted to bring in Dorian Finney-Smith. I feel like that might be the higher end of the realistic outcomes if the Pelicans are open to doing something like that. I just feel like it's worth saying it because the Pelicans, who knows now what's going to happen there, that they've completely changed their front office. But that would be something really good and sneaky I could see them adding where, yeah, he's not like this huge, expensive, big name guy. Like in NBA circles, I think he's a pretty big name, but that is someone that I think would be like a really good fit I think really complete that starting five, that closing five. And as far as what they have to give up, like we said, they're not trading their top three guys. I don't think they're going to trade Zach Edey. I think they want to keep him. So when you look at their other players, I'm looking at their roster right now. Not like there's Jalen Wells, and then like a lot of the other guys, they're mostly like good rotation pieces for the Grizzlies. They don't really have that much trade value at all, but they do have up to 4 first-round picks they can trade, I believe, because they already traded this year's picks, or maybe it's 3, but they've got some draft equity if they want to be aggressive.
For sure.
Which is, and it would have been something aggressive like that to get a guy like Mikal or OG. But I would say, yeah, most likely it's going to be in that realm of like a pretty good starter, a good 4th or 5th option offensively, like these guys we mentioned, where you don't have to get too aggressive with the picks because they likely won't. They've been pretty conservative for the most part, keeping their draft picks, using them to further build out the roster.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. Yeah, when you talk about the high end guys, it's kind of been a challenge historically, not just this is anything new. It's always been a challenge of getting those guys to Memphis, so to speak. So yeah, you mentioned Kevin Durant and the rumors there and whatnot. Like there's been interest in Kevin Durant in the past, for sure. He, to me, would make a lot of sense if the Suns are just in a situation where they're saying, all right, look, we're going to trade him and we need draft capital because they don't have much of any of it. And the Grizzlies, as you just said, they have pretty much control after this season. They have control of all their future picks pretty much. And they did a couple pick swaps, with the Suns actually. And that's something kind of to monitor going forward. You talk about draft capital. They got a nice, they took a chance there. And when they traded David Roddy, they got a pick swap in that trade. That's something that could come in handy going forward. But Yeah, I do agree with you. Like it's gonna be tough to get that super flashy, high end. Oh, we're going to the championship type player. The Grizzlies gonna have to do it how they always do it, the grit and grind way, right? And that's where guys like you mentioned Herb Jones. That's a name. My co-host on Locked On Grizzlies, Joe Mullinax, has kind of been beating that drum. He's a big on the idea of Herb Jones, being a attractive target, one that's cost efficient, based on the way that he plays. It's all gonna come down to his ability to shoot the basketball, which he's made a lot of progress in that area since coming into the league. I remember when the Grizzlies used to guard him, they just sag off, to like the free throw line and dare him to shoot. But he's made a lot of progression, in that area as a shooter. We know about the defense as you mentioned, and that's a realistic option for the Grizzlies, not only because of what they can offer, but a lot of times when you're looking for trade partners, to me, you're looking for teams that have a lot of redundancy, at positions and whatnot. And that's kind of been the situation with the Pelicans. Like if you go to the Pelicans last season, it was always, to me, looking at the Pelicans from afar, it's like they got Brandon Ingram, they got Dyson Daniels, they got Herb Jones, they got Trey Murphy. That's four guys who are probably natural threes. Like, sure, you can, one guy could play the four here, one guy could play the two here, but there's going to be some movement. Next thing you know, Dyson Daniels gets traded. Brandon Ingram, the contract situation, but he gets moved. But you still have, like, especially with the way that Trey Murphy has just like taken off. Like he had a real good year this year, and it's hard to see them starting Herb Jones and Trey Murphy unless, one's playing small ball four or one's moving over to the two. Then you got the whole DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, the other, like it's a lot that goes into that. So it does seem like a more plausible route. This is not unrealistic at all. And I'm always conscious of the cap situations of other teams too. It's about redundancy to me. If you're talking about trades, you're looking for those teams that have too much depth, or just players that play too similarly, at positions. And you're looking and I think the Pelicans kind of can qualify, in that area. And then you're looking for teams who, are going to probably try to cut their bill, right? You're looking for those type of teams. And that's where, teams like the Suns, teams like the Timberwolves, those kind of teams, kind of come into play for me. And the Suns, they recently re-signed a few guys. I know they have like a Royce O'Neal over there. I don't know if that would be like a top target for me with the Grizzlies, but he is a guy who, I mean, he shot the 3-pointer very well this past season. 6'4", a little bit undersized from that standpoint, but if you watch Royce O'Neal play over the years, he doesn't play undersized. He's guarded fours, he's guarded threes, he's guarded twos. Very long arms for a guy who's listed at 6'4". Shot the 3-pointer, like I said, very well this year, and he had a lot of shot on a lot of attempts. So it's those gritty players who can kind of come in and do the dirty work, right? But can make shots. That's the key, because they've had the Dylan Brooks, they've had the Marcus Smarts, but they need guys who can make shots. Royce O'Neal, another guy who has playoff experience. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, a guy who has playoff experience. I think that's going to be a big key too for the Grizzlies this offseason. They're not just going to go out and try to get guys who are 22 years old and say, oh, let's take a chance on him. Maybe he'll be this in 3 years or whatever the case may be. I think you want to put around Jaren, around Ja, around Dez, your core, you want to put guys with playoff experience, with a little I've been there and I've done that, who have put up some numbers from time to time in the playoffs. And we've seen Nickeil Alexander-Walker making an impact now for Minnesota. We've seen Royce O'Neal, whether it be in Utah, in other places, he's made an impact in the playoffs. So those are the type of names that stand out to me as cost-effective names that you can go get, and those teams would be willing to play ball with you.
One other aspect that could fuel our Herb Jones fantasy speculation, the lottery. If the Pelicans stay where they're supposed to be slotted, like 4th overall, 5th overall, something like that, some of the best players available in that range are all guards. So if you're bringing in another guard and you've got Trey and you've got Zion at the forwards, that could maybe eventually push something that could lead to a decision to trade Herb Jones. I feel like that's just like the perfect fit for the Grizzlies, what they're looking for. He needs to make shots.
Sense, man.
He does need to make shots. He made shots in his third season. Hasn't hasn't really like made shots at the clip you'd want in all other seasons, but if he can at least get back to I remember he shot like 41% last year, pretty low volume, but maybe he can, if he can do that, it could be a good fit. You mentioned that the Suns swap. That's a very interesting dynamic, because if you're listening to this and you're probably thinking, well, the Grizzlies are always going to be pretty good. They're going to win like 45 games at a minimum. Like, how valuable can their own draft picks be? So they do have a swap going on with the Suns next year for 2026, and maybe they might have another one. I'm not sure for a future year. But just to give an idea of the value in that, like how that might work. Let's say the swap was this year. The Suns were like ninth, had the ninth worth record. And the Magic, they also have a swap going on, like with the same swap. It's really complicated. But like basically, if it happened this year, then the Magic and Suns would swap. So this Magic would probably be like in the top 10, wherever the Suns are slotted. Then the Magic are now in like the Magic are now in like the top 10. The Suns drop to like the middle of the first, but then the Grizzlies get to swap that. So now instead of having like the 25th, 26th overall, wherever they're projected to be,
you're in the teens.
Exactly. So that is a pretty valuable pick, because a lot can happen. What if both the Magic and the Suns really struggle next year? Now all of a sudden the Grizzlies can get even higher. So there's some upside in that pick. And when they were in discussions for Dorian Finney-Smith, there were rumors that the Nets wanted that selection. And I don't know if it doesn't seem like the Grizzlies were interested in trading that. The deal didn't get done. So that's somewhat of a valuable pick. And I guess, like, I might be wrong. They might have another swap with the Suns going on in the future. So there is some upside with some of their future picks to get something done for some of these guys he's mentioned. So I'm pretty confident they'll be able to get someone. But I don't think they need too much. I think what they had going with Dylan Brooks was great. Just like, they just needed him to stick with the shot hierarchy. Like, if they can just get a guy who, like, is going to be the third, like the fourth guy option offensively and defend at a high level.
That was part of the problem with Dylan. Yeah.
That's all you really need. And it's for some reason, it's just been really hard to, it's just been like a very impossible quest for them to find that guy, but hopefully they can do it this year.
It's a tough role, man. Yeah.
But, and Jalen Wells, he's good. We know he's good, but I do think they need like, I do think they need like a more veteran presence there, especially for the playoffs. But let's get to probably the most important aspect of the Grizzlies offseason, Jaren Jackson Jr. So at some point, I don't know if it's this week or next week, we'll find out if Jaren made an All-NBA team, in which case he'll be eligible for the Supermax, which would be up to 5 years, $345 million. I don't think he's going to get that full amount. But I am expecting that he will probably make an All-NBA team, second or third. And it definitely opens up the possibility of him, like, realistically getting somewhere in like that 30% range. If for some reason, it's just worth noting that if for some reason he doesn't get All-NBA, the Grizzlies are hedged to give him a lucrative extension anyways, because they gave him a pretty cheap extension that he's currently on, and it declined. So you can't extend it. But in case he doesn't get All-NBA, they have some cap space this summer from trading Smart. So they can boost his salary this year through a renegotiation up to something higher, and then get his future numbers close to the max, to something viable that he would probably extend for. They did that while also being able to re-sign Aldama. So they check all their boxes there. But I'm expecting probably going to be eligible for the Supermax, which is going to lead to a very, very fascinating negotiation, because on one hand, he signed this extension that's pretty below market. Like, he's vastly exceeded the value of that with his production. But if he gets the if he's eligible to sign up to 35% max, I just have a hard time seeing it get up there and necessarily even like close to that. I get the feeling the Grizzlies are going to have to draw a line somewhere. And I'm kind of curious where that is, because yes, Jaren won Defensive Player of the Year a couple of years ago. He's like a consistent all defensive player. But usually these like 35% max super maxes are reserved for players that can be like number one elite options on a team. And Jaren's a great offensive player, but he's not that. So the question is, I mean, I'm just very curious to see how that
Yeah.
might happen. And if it seems like it might, like what the sensitivity of this negotiation would be, considering, in a way, he kind of left some money on the table these last few years.
Yeah, man, this is to me. I mean, in Memphis, it's the topic of conversation. But I mean, even league wide, I think Jaren's situation is one that everyone should be wanting to monitor for a lot of reasons. You said something really important there about how the supermax is usually reserved for those 1A type of guys, right? Well, you just look at the history. For one, the Supermax hasn't been around a long time. Like, it's really relatively a new term. And in the history of the Supermax, 13 guys have been eligible for it. 12 have signed it. 12 have hourly signed the Supermax. The only one player has not, and that's Rudy Gobert. And even then, it wasn't some situation where he took like this massive discount. Like Rudy Gobert was still very handsomely paid. So when you factor all of that into the equation, I've reached out to people and talked to people who have votes. I had a vote myself. I had Jaren Jackson Jr. third team All NBA on my ballot, and it feels like honestly it's going to be very close. It's going to be close. It's closer to him being either third team and not making it than him being either second or third team. It is. When I talk to people, hear the names that come up just to give you kind of a reference point of where it is. People will say, "Oh, I was deciding between him and Jalen Williams, or I was deciding between Jaren Jackson Jr. and James Harden for one of my last spots on the third team." Alperen Sengun's name has come up, so it's like those are the players that he's kind of been grouped with, and it's like maybe two or three out of the three names will get all NBA recognition or whatever the case may be. So getting back to the point with Jaren, I do see it as a situation that if he's eligible, if he makes all NBA, the Grizzlies are going to want to get a deal done, right? You don't want this to drag into next offseason, and then it kind of becomes a free for all for everyone. So you want to get this done now, this offseason. And there is a history there, with Desmond Bane's contract. We kind of just refer to it as like a max deal, right? But technically, he's a little bit under the max. So it's not something that's unfamiliar with the Grizzlies where, they have the ability to offer a guy a max and, they toe the line a little bit. I like what you said about the 30% number because you're familiar with it, and I'm sure most of your listeners are. 30% is usually where guys of Jaren's caliber kind of fall in the max range, because the 35% max, which is the super max, is usually, like you said, that's what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, is probably going to sign. So with that being said, I do think the Grizzlies and Jaren should be able to settle somewhere around that 30% number. When push comes to shove and all of that. And I'm sure, Jaren's side's going to argue for more on the high end initially. And like you said, the Grizzlies are going to have to draw the line somewhere. But I think with what Jaren has done in his career, and, you can make an argument both ways. Like you said, Jaren just played on a relatively cheap deal for what he did as a player. And he could say, hey, look, I just easily outplayed that contract. I won Defensive Player of the Year. He's probably going to be first or second team all defense this year. And he's like, look, I'm one of the better defenders in the league. And I'm available. In a time where a lot of Grizzlies players are, dealing with injuries right now. Like the last couple seasons, Jaren has been steadily available. So when you factor that in addition to the production, I think you're looking at a situation where Jaren's going to put himself in position to get roughly to that 30% number, which still would be the largest contract in Grizzlies franchise history, because Ja Morant is at 25%. So it's a situation where I think we're still looking at Jaren Jackson Jr. Being the highest paid player in Grizzlies history, but definitely not getting that full supermax contract.
I think you just perfectly encapsulated what will probably happen. You brought up Gobert, and I think that is probably the the closest precedent for this type of situation. So he got, so if you get the Supermax, you can get between 30 to 35%. They gave him
Yeah.
like 31%. I think they gave him like just a little above 30%, where, okay,
Yeah.
you're not getting the full 35, but we're going to give you a little more than what the open market will probably offer you. Because
Mm,
if Gobert hit free agency, other teams can only offer him the 30%.
right.
So I would imagine that is the direction the Grizzlies will go, because whether, as I think about what the market would be for Jaren if he were to hit free agency, whether or not you think he's like he is a 30% guy, or maybe he should get something a little bit below, I think there would be max offers for him. I would think
All it
there's going
takes
to
is
be
one
teams.
team to say, yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
I just, he is such a unique player,
Hmm.
and he'd probably be he'd be so coveted if for some reason he and the Grizzlies can't agree to an extension this summer. I think they would get a lot for him, but with that said, I feel pretty confident that, especially with the way he played this year, if he made it to free agency, he would get a 30% max offer. In which case, if you're the Grizzlies, you might need to just top it by a little bit.
Yep.
And so I think that Gobert present, that might be the way it goes. Now, so I'm pretty confident they'll get something done. The bigger challenge then, just looking ahead, is that it's gonna still be pretty hard to continue building this roster when you have
Yeah.
Jaren making that much. John Morant, he could easily be a supermax guy, and he would
Yep.
probably be the guy that if he gets it, he'll probably get the full thing. Just
Hmm.
so because next year, if he gets the All NBA, he can just get the supermax. And then
Yep.
you mentioned Bane. He's making, it's like a pseudo max contract. It's not technically a max, but what they did is they just made his salaries like identical with John Morant's max. And then like they put incentives. I don't know what they are, but if he hits them,
Hmm.
then it actually reaches the full max. So it's a very unique deal that I haven't seen many other teams emulate for.
Mm.
But still, that's like 3 max level deals, and like with various percentages of the cap. So eventually, you might get to a point where you got Jaren and Ja making 30% of the max, Bane making around 25%. So when we get to that point, you mentioned in a couple of years from now, about like, when do they really need to start showing results before they might consider trading either one of these guys. It's just gonna be a real challenge, and they've done a great job. Like I mentioned, they're always gonna be able to have a very deep bench, because they just know how to identify players out of nowhere. They bring them on these 4-year minimum deals, so they've got a bench, but they've got their
Hmm.
core, and they have like one more move that they can realistically get. All those guys we mentioned, they're all like making around the mid level, so you can fit that salary structure while you have Ja, Bane, and Jaren making max level deals. So at that point, that's basically the team. And the Grizzlies, I think maybe they paid the tax like a long time ago, but it doesn't mean that because they haven't paid any tax recently that they won't, or
Right.
even they might still be able to, they might even be willing to get above like the second apron and stuff, if the team is good enough. I remember a couple of years ago, Windhorse was reporting about how the Grizzlies owner would be willing to spend deep in the tax if the team is like a true championship contender. And
Yeah.
I think I believe it. I think that they would, even though we haven't seen the willingness to spend so far, they've been trying to get under the tax. It's all pragmatic. If you don't need to pay the tax, just get under it.
Right.
So on one hand, I think they're going to just be smart about things. But I wouldn't expect too much of a significant addition to this core, knowing how much all these guys are getting paid. But at the same time, if they are able to become a top team in the West that's gonna be able to make a couple conference finals appearances, I think there's a good chance the Grizzlies are gonna be willing to spend deeply to do whatever it takes to put this team in a legitimate position to build a championship. But first, we got to see. I think we do need to see a little more from this group and what an
Yeah.
additional fourth guy can do.
For sure. For sure. I think, to me, when you talk about the assets in the route to, that additional fourth guy and things like that, the mid level exception is something you talk about the assets that they've used over the years. They haven't been big players with the non-taxpayer MLE. But if we just look at the situation where Jaren is probably going to be going into a new contract next year, John Morant's contract, Desmond Bane's contract, this might be the last offseason for a while where they have access to the non-taxpayer MLE, which is the biggest one, which a lot of the great teams in the league don't have. So that kind of, when you talk about you being able to offer this and then other teams being able to offer the taxpayer, mid-level exception and things like that. And there's a sizable gap there. And that being the difference, when you talk about a guy like a Nickeil Alexander Walker and putting yourselves in position to get those really good rotation players that could take you to the next level, why not use it? I think now is the time to, hey, look, you're gonna be in the tax, regardless, next year. At this point, now you can debate whether you want to be below the first apron and all that, but they're gonna go into the tax. So the Santi Aldama situation will work itself out. It's a he's entering restricted free agency, so there's going to be that as well. But I'm looking at this as something like, hey, look, if you really want to say we want to put ourselves in the best position to compete, for a championship, to be one of the best teams in the Western Conference, to feel like you did in 2022 when you felt like, oh, okay, we're right there, like we're on the up and up. If you want to really feel like that, you have to do whatever you can to best complement John Morant, Desmond Bain, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Because if you're not complimenting them to the best of your ability, then to me that says you don't believe in that big three to the best of your ability, which opens a whole nother conversation to what we've kind of been talking about a little bit here about what you're going to do long term with that big three. So I think that non-taxpayer MLE, I mean, I'm looking at it, and again, like I said, there's only a little bit more than a third of the league has access to it. The Grizzlies are one of the better teams that'll have the non-taxpayer MLE. Use it. Use it this year. That's where you can get a really good rotation player, potentially that fourth best guy that you're talking about, a really good player who's going to be in those closing lineups. Maybe not start, maybe will start. But we've seen that work out for some other teams, in recent years, getting players with that mid-level exception and turning those guys into the fourth or fifth best players and real good rotation players.
You make a really excellent point about how this year is probably their best chance to make that type of move, because I'm looking ahead into next year, like really forward thinking. Once they extend Jaren, they give him his 30% max, most likely. That's like a $51 million salary. Aldama will have been resigned. He'll be I'm guessing he'll be making like around the mid-level, maybe a little more.
Yeah.
And then if you include another mid-level type signing, they're already going to be like pretty close to the 2027 tax. So they wouldn't have access to the mid-level. They wouldn't really have that tax flexibility to make a trade, even to go after a guy that just to add that fourth or fifth guy. So no, that totally makes sense. This is their best opportunity. They have a lot of tax flexibility right now, and they probably wouldn't have the mid-level exception in the following offseason. It's also worth noting that the mid-level exception can now be used as a trade exception. You can acquire a guy who makes that salary or less. Herb Jones happens to make a little bit less than that, so they could just absorb him without sending out any significant salary. They don't have to do any big salary matching for that. So yeah, I think they are going to strike for like a mid-level-ish salary guy, whether they use the exception or they can do like a sign and trade. Because maybe in Nickeil Alexander Walker, maybe he'll need a little more than the mid-level, in which case the Grizzlies would have to do a sign and trade. So either way, they're well positioned now, more than any time in the next 2 years, to bring in that fourth or fifth option and also give them the type of contract that they would need. But Damichael, I think we covered everything. Find their next, complete that starting lineup and kind of see what Jaren's extension would look like. And I think that will kind of cover their offseason. It might not be that exciting, but I think that's kind of what the main priorities will be. So thanks for joining me. I think we got everything. You have anything coming up that we should be on the lookout for?
Not necessarily, man. I'm in off season mode a little bit here, but with that being said, the Grizzlies, as you just discussed, this is off season where we're not necessarily discussing them making that making that move for a superstar, so to speak, as much as around those core three guys. But I think there's going to be some movement. Like I think, put it like this: in recent off seasons, we've seen a move here, a move there. I expect at least four off-season transactions with the Grizzlies in terms of free agency trades and things like that because they don't have a first-round pick, so it's not like you have to add a guaranteed contract as a rookie. So you have the ability now with at least three unrestricted free agents to go out and get some players that you feel can take this team to the next level. Those gritty players, those tough players, and look. Like we talked about the mid-level exception, but outside of that, you got to find your Chris Dunn. You got to find your Malik Beasley. They're always going to be out there. The Grizzlies have done a solid job of finding those, needle in a haystack type impact players in recent years. So they got to do it again if they want to be up there with the OKCs, the Timberwolves, the Warriors of the world.
Yeah, I agree. They're gonna do something. We don't know exactly what, but they're gonna do. I think they're gonna make some changes to the roster
For sure.
So that's Damichael, everyone. Make sure to follow him on Twitter and Blue Sky at Damichael C. And you can check him out on Locked On Grizzlies and see his reporting on the Commercial Appeal. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky as well at Yossi Goslin. Same thing, my name on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple for all the previous podcasts. I'll be having a lot more content coming out over the next few weeks, more podcasts, more my salary cast, where I'm going to be doing these salary cap breakdowns with hypothetical moves for each team. At some point, I will do the Grizzlies, probably show like the actual numbers and breakdown of how the Grizzlies can accomplish all these goals we talked about.
That'll be good. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll probably start once the lottery. Now that the lottery's tonight, we're gonna have a lot more clarity on what teams. Where teams stand. That's when I like to start looking into these hypothetical stuff. So be on the lookout for that, everyone. At some point, I will do a more deeper cap analysis on the Grizzlies on Third Apron, talk about like where Jaren's numbers can truly fall at, all sorts of other options at the mid-level they can realistically get. And that's about it. I will be back later today. I'm going to do a stream just during the lottery, just kind of watching it. I've got my own little interactive thing, like how on the ESPN they do like their thing, their graphic that updates it. I'll do my own and just kind of react to it. Should be just a pretty chill live stream. So we'll see you guys. I'll see you guys later today.